So if you don't want to be on YouTube, then by all means, feel free to turn your webcam off. I think both speakers are happy to be interrupted as they speak. So I'm not going to ask everybody to mute, other than obviously if you've got a noisy background, then please do keep your mic muted so that you're not distracting the speakers. So if you don't want to, and that's me, you can hear in the background interrupting myself. So we'll start with Cathrin, with Kat, and she will be speaking for the better part of an hour and taking questions after that, and then we'll have a short break for you to nip to the toilet and change your drink and things like that, and then Mohit will be speaking until he leaves, essentially, and then but we will stick around until everybody leaves, so there'll be plenty of time for catching up as well. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will pass across to the fabulous Kat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pete. Hi, guys. I have got the chat open, by the way, so if you want to drop any questions mid-talk, absolutely just go for it. What I'm going to be talking about today is actually an interesting story. First off, it's like a journey. I went from being a cleaner through to running a 6-figure art business, making space, glow-in-the-dark space art instantly, because everything's better with a bit of glow in the dark. But also I'm going to be dropping a few hints and tips and tricks on if you want to turn your kind of like side business into like a main business, I guess. By all means, either interrupt me or feel free to like pop something in any questions that pop up if you're curious. But I'm going to take you back to the very beginning of my journey. And this is me with my very first painting. I'll just do a quick introduction for those that don't know me. My name's Kat. I'm a deep space artist and science communicator. And I am obsessed with space because frankly, how beautiful is it? I actually started life out at Loughborough University. Big up Loughborough University. Woo woo. And studying engineering, but I did it because I wanted to avoid being an artist, because I think like most people, I had parents that told me that I should get a real job. I don't know if anyone has had that moment. But I was told that obviously art, and I had this opinion that all artists would be, bumming cigarettes and sleeping on people's couches. So I absolutely avoided it like the plague. That's why I went and tried engineering, because I wanted to rebel against being an artist. I don't know who does that, but obviously me, a bit of a weird one. But anyway, I want to get to the interesting stuff. I decided to leave my university course before I actually graduated. I was studying mechanical engineering, which obviously got in the way of my frequent drinking and partying, to be absolutely frankly. But I know it sounds weird and it's probably not a great thing to talk about, but actually what I realized was that when you go down life, often it's the side avenues that offer probably the things that are going to be very beneficial to you. And what I realized is learning how to run an event and learning how to, perform is actually key to my success today. But more on that later. So I ended up leaving engineering. I'm just doing this a little bit so you have a bit of a pre-context for the journey. I went and then started in the games industry. My brother had a little opening in his company, or a company he was working at. And I joined there, working on my very first game, which was Warhammer Online. I don't know if anyone knows Warhammer. You have to be the right kind of nerd for that one. So if you're nodding, I know you, I see you. Yeah, Pete. Yeah, Ollie. Anyway, so I started my career with that, but I realized I was desperately miserable and I didn't really like it, because actually deep down inside, I wanted to actually be an artist. I didn't really know that at the time, but I thought something would make me happy, which would be being at the top of the tree. So I worked all the way up to being an executive producer, managing a team of 600 people. And my final game that I made was also Warhammer, this time a 40K game, if you were into the 40K. Hey, Alan, I see you in the chat. And not that I want to big myself up, but I was actually the Eldar Queen voice. Yeah, because we ran out of budget. But anyway, they just needed someone English, to be fair, and a female. And I was the only one. So there we go. But the reason why I did all this build up is I got to a point in my career, and I'm sure that all of you have been here at some point, firstly, where I said, what the heck am I doing with my life? I realized that I was at this point at the end of a video game. If people don't really know video game development, we always, not always, but most of the time we have something called crunch period. Happens in all software development. See you nodding there, Pete. It's just one of those things, right? And in particular with video games, it's a lot worse when it comes to crunch period. And that's because what happens is you have to book all of your marketing and all of your print media 9 months in advance, right? Because of course that's how the print space works. However, during that 9 months, you've got driver updates, Steam has updated, Windows had an update, and everything on your graphics card has changed, and everything's broken, and everything's on fire, and you're in fire, and you're cycling through hell, also on fire, and you're working insane hours. And this was the point that I got to where I was like, what am I doing with my life? And it happens to all of us at different stages. Has anyone had that? Or is that just a me thing? Feel free to butt in or chat if you felt like that before. I've realized that I didn't have a purpose for my life. I was making things that distracted people rather than made them better. Thanks, Anna. I'm glad I'm not alone in that one. Yeah, so I realized I had to make a change. Of course, I launched the video game, and it went really well. I've got to be honest. But I was lost. I decided after we launched the Steam game, they said, right, no time for a break. Let's go straight onto mobile, in which I said, goodbye. And I'd never went back to the games industry. Rob says he feels like that every 6 weeks. I get you. For me, I was working 12 to 14-hour days, 7 days a week for 3 months straight, sometimes sleeping under my desk. And I was broken. I couldn't wash my clothes. I had to get a full-time cleaner into my house because I couldn't do any simple things like go shopping. And I always find it very amazing when people brag about this, because it was seriously probably the worst point of my life. And even thinking about it, I get I feel anxious because I just don't want anyone to ever have to go through that. It was a good testing ground. I learned a lot of things, and I definitely wouldn't change the past because it taught me a lot, but I don't wish it on anyone, to be absolutely honest. So after I quit, I decided that we'd actually already had this planned, ironically, perfect synchronicity. We ended up in Peru in an ayahuasca retreat. I don't know if anyone knows ayahuasca, but we then did lots of, which probably makes sense once you see all my space artwork. We did several ayahuasca ceremonies, and I realized that I was going to go back at that point to carry on making video games, but I realized that I was suffering from the F word, the very dangerous F word, which is the worst word in the world, which is that I'm fine. We all have it. Thanks. I appreciate your comments, by the way, guys. I was fine. I kept on saying, oh yeah, I've got no sleep and I've not seen my partner. At the time I saw my partner as we sometimes in the kitchen. He'd be like, oh, you live here too. I was miserable and I didn't want to admit it because I am a massive optimist and I don't really like complaining. And I'm sure that there are lots of people out there like that. But part of the problem is that you're not necessarily listening to what's going on inside. And I certainly bloody wasn't. So I decided I couldn't go back. And I felt like I'd lost my whole life. I know that sounds dramatic, but I spent 10 years of my life. I had this whole career path ahead of me in my mind. And I felt like I'd wasted a decade of my life training to be in an industry that I could never go back to, because now I'd become an executive producer and done every step up to that point. I was now massively overqualified for everything within the games industry, apart from being at the top. And that was very hectic and definitely, I believe, a young person's game. But not to say that you can't go into it if you are very passionate about games. Of course, But my recommendation is go in and do something that you're passionate about for sure. For me, it wasn't that. And I tried everything. And at that point, I decided I couldn't go back into doing software development again. So I decided that instead I would start a cleaning company because I'd been so reliant on it. And it was the thing that kind of saved my life. You know, I literally couldn't have functioned without it. So there I was scrubbing toilets after being on a very high paid executive wage, and it still wasn't right. And in the background, I was painting. And this is one of those paintings. This was December in 2016. So 4 or 5 years ago. And I was just painting every 2-3 hours on a weekend. And this is what I want to preach to everybody, is that you do not need to have a mental breakdown or a nervous breakdown in order to start following your dreams. Of course, it is great. And if you're going to have one, I definitely recommend at least one and schedule it in at some point. But you know, the key is that you can actually start following your passions way before it becomes a major issue in your life. So what I was doing is 2 or 3 hours every Saturday, and I started up a Facebook page, and it started to grow in momentum. It started with just a few people, and as Ollie knows, I DJ'd at the Students' Union, so I sort of already had some following from DJing, and it was sort of a new endeavor for me. But it grew and grew, and after about 2 months into painting, I was asked to do an exhibition by a friend, and I thought that is a fantastic idea. So my plan was to hire a room in Sydney, Australia, fill it with alcohol, fill it with space paintings, maybe an astrophysics professor or two. Thank you, Ollie. I appreciate that. I was all right. I was pretty all right as a DJ. And I decided that I would give it a go. I would create lots of different artworks, and it was a low bar. And I highly recommend this, that your first step into Anna, how did I learn to paint? I've got a picture, I've got a slide ready just for this. This is me as Bob Ross. Can you see that? Legitimately, I literally learned to paint from YouTube, from watching Bob Ross. I was waiting for this question. Here's a great thing, right, guys? If you wanted to learn how to do anyone, by the way, Bob bless you all. And of course, happy little accidents and all of that stuff. The Bob Ross is just the best thing ever. But yeah, you don't, if there's anything, whether you want to learn how to code, here's the key thing, right? Whether you want to learn how to code, whether you want to learn how to change your spark plug in your car, fix a washing machine, maybe even create some interesting internet connective sculptures. I don't know, maybe there's something on there, Mohit. You can find it on the internet. And I know that sounds cheap because I spent my whole life studying university, but you don't necessarily need that in order to progress. Everything literally, we are living in this connected world right now. Even now, you can just go online and find someone that already does it and say, hey, I know this is awkward, but do you mind if I could steal a second from you? I want to ask about something I'm passionate about. Anyway, I was trying to put on this event, but 8 months now out of a high-paying executive job, and at the time I was getting married, which of course is literally the most expensive time of your life, because it's like, it's the happiest day of your life. Give me all of your money, of course. Anyone know those? Anyone get married? It's one of those. Anyway, so I had made a plan, and I figured out if I raised $4,000, I could do it. So I'd seen a website called Kickstarter. Does everyone know what Kickstarter is? A few of you that don't know. I can see you over there. So anyone that doesn't know what Kickstarter is, it's a little bit like a GoFundMe. So it's like an online platform where people can put in information, you know, they can donate small amounts, and in return, they'll get something. So for instance, if you put in £25 or $25, you might get a small print, £50 or $50, you might get a bigger print, and so on. And the idea with it is it's an all or nothing campaign. So the way the Kickstarter works is you have a set amount of time, which you define yourself, in order to raise the money. And if you don't raise the money in that time, and also you define the amount. So for me, it was $4,000 in 30 days, which I thought was ridiculous, because at this point I'd never sold a piece of artwork before. I thought, like, I never thought I could sell a single thing. I thought it was absolutely bananas that anyone would want to buy anything. This is actually not one of the ones for sale. But as an example, right?
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it, Pete.
Swapnil's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Scott.
Oh, Swapnil. Do you want to come off mute, Swapnil, and ask? Or oh, maybe not. I don't know. We can carry on.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Alan says he's back to Fairview. Pebble smartwatch. Oh my God, that is like probably if you were going to be like one of the OG Kickstarter crew, Pebble is probably the best one to have ever backed. I'm not sure if you ever got your Pebble, but you know, at least you were in with the gang, you know. There have been good and bad ones on Kickstarter because you get to learn the terror of logistics. But anyway, so and Mohit said the particle, the company he worked on, started in Kickstarter. Hooray! That's amazing. I love it. It's actually a fabulous way to get your ideas. And because people give you funding in advance of final product, it allows you to have time to, you know, do some development and research along the way. So I decided I'd raise $4,000. I thought I would never do it because, you know, I'd never sold artwork. I was physically sick before I launched it. But as it happens, it went really well. We started on $4,000 and I'd made no contingency to do more. And then it hit 10 and then it hit 20 and then 30 and then 40. And it finished on $70,000. And I had this coming to Jesus moment. I was going to swear then, Pete, I didn't, I held back. But I had this holy moment where I realized I had a new job and this was was creating artwork. And even at that point in my career, it didn't glow in the dark or anything like that. I had a moment and it was a turning point. And I realized right there in that moment that I could earn more creating these beautiful art pieces than I ever had as an executive producer making video games. And it was something that I was super passionate about. And I didn't even realize it was available. And the crazy bloody thing is it's available to everybody on this chat if you wanted to give it a go. But I didn't just carry on making artwork like this. I went on to make lots of different types of artwork. This is what I made 2 years after that picture. And the way that I learned how to do this was literally just by Google and just by YouTubing different things. I would YouTube. And I know this sounds really basic, but I want to go through this because I want to make you really clear that like I didn't have, like I started to learn to paint 4 years ago. And the way that I learned was literally by typing in things like, how do I mix colors? You know, how do I paint a photorealistic thing? I literally found a YouTube video for every single different thing. This painting now hangs in a very well-known space company that we might have spoken about earlier before the YouTube stream went live, and is now hanging in their headquarters in Hawthorne, California, and have painted for their executives as well. All through doing these Kickstarter projects. In particular, this rocket company, which I can't say the names of, but you all know what it is. My brother is a massive fan and loves the company hugely. And he came to me and was very, very sad because he couldn't get admitted into the company because, of course, you have to be an American citizen in order to get it because it's ITAR, you know, the rocketry is ITAR covered, which means it's military grade. And the year before I'd started painting, I'd made the New Year's resolution to start painting. This was my second year of painting, and I made the New Year's resolution. I thought the first year was pretty good. Let's make a New Year's resolution for the second year, which was to paint big. And he called me up one day and he was really devastated because he was in the US. And of course, he couldn't get admitted into the rocket company. And I thought, I just had this crazy thought, like, what if I paint a picture for the rocket company and then we get in? So I did. But I was being really cheeky. And what I want to stress with this point is that often the most well-trodden path is not the one to go on because that one has all of the blocks and defending points on. you really want to go, honestly, on the unusual path is the best way. So I decided, rather than call up the reception desk and see how I would organize it, I would just send an email directly to the COO of this massive rocket company with this picture. However, I hadn't painted it at that point. I had a blank canvas because I thought, well, I better check they want it before I send it. But just for good measure, I thought I would Photoshop the actual picture that I wanted to paint onto the canvas, never really expecting that they would respond. But I thought, what the heck anyway, what have I got to lose at this point? So I sent the COO of this big rocket company a picture of this. It was actually similar to this. And, oh, anyone want to say anything? No, all good. If you have any comments or questions, just pop them in the chat as well, or just come off mic and just say something, interrupt me. That's all good. Anyway, I decided that I wanted to get him into this, my brother into this rocket company, and I emailed the COO with this Photoshop picture, mind you, which is probably, I didn't realize at the time, probably one of the ballsiest things I've ever done, considering actually at that point, I was still painting like this, not like this. But much to my surprise, I got an email back going, oh my gosh, this picture is beautiful. I need to find out where to hang it. And then I had that moment when I realized that I knew how to mix a purple, but I didn't know how to mix the exact shade of purple and place it in the exact location that's correct on this particular canvas, because I accidentally Photoshopped not a paintedly kind of picture. I Photoshopped an actual photograph of space. And now I realize I had to replicate it, because there's nothing like backing yourself into a bloody corner. Well done, Kat. It turned out all right, because as it happens, this painting now hangs with them. And I must tell you that the day I got to call my big brother, who was like my best friend in the world, and was like, you never guess where we're going. We're going to the rocket company in California. He absolutely screamed down the phone like a 2-year-old child. Being given candy for the first time. It was amazing. It was just probably the most heartwarming experience. Anyway, what I want to just explain to people, I mean, I say this all the time, but this kind of thing was never in my mind as a realm of possibility. The fact that anyone could do anything like, because I just love space. For me, it is the most beautiful thing ever, in every single direction, almost infinitely, is space. Like, we get very contained within the 4 walls that we exist in, and out there are stars being ripped apart by black holes. There are galaxies, and I mean, I know this sounds stupid, but you know, when you see the little tiny points of light, they're gigantic suns, just like ours. Many of them are way bigger than our sun. They're huge, and we almost forget about them. Later on, I developed my own technology to print in glow in the dark, because for me, there's only one thing better. Oh, by the way, this painting also glows in the dark, but as it happens, this particular space company never turned their lights off. So that was great. Good move. But one of the things I did was I developed a, Anja said, my daughter and I are watching your talk at the moment, a 6 and 9-year-old. Hi, guys. Did you ever practice over and over again? I absolutely did. And I really have some great advice for this. I'll show you another picture of a painting of space. So one of the key things in order to progress, and this is for any hobby, for any skill, whether you want to learn coding or painting, is that when you make a mistake, don't berate yourself and say, oh, I'm so stupid. And how many of us do that? Like, we all do. We go, oh, I'm such an idiot. I did this. Never say that. Refuse to say it. If you ever say those words, grab them, put them back in your mouth, because you don't need to say that out loud. Instead, say, wow, I've just learned something new, because that's actually what you have done. And what I did is I started to make a diary of all the different new things that I learned. Instead of making a list of mistakes, I made a list of lessons. And if you do this, you will literally supercharge your learnings. In fact, I started to look for lessons. And it's all about changing the way that you think, because your language really, really impacts the way that you think all the time. And if I say right now, guys, I want you to look around your room, if you could just surveil the room in front of you. And now I want you to look around the room again, but I'm going to say the color red, and everything that's red is now jumping out at you. Okay. And now if I say the color blue, everything around you that's blue is jumping out of you. And that's called a paradigm shift. It's the filter in which you look at the world has changed. It does work. It's weird, right? When you go out into the world and you look at your mistakes, you will absolutely, everything is great. Hey, actually, you know what the funny thing is that my entire background is actually gray. It's really boring. Anyway, back to the space paintings. The key thing is that whatever you focus on is what you see more. So, you know, and we think we've all had that moment where we buy a new car and no one's got that car on the road. And then all of a sudden, everyone's got the car that you've got and you thought it was different and unique. You're like, wow, everyone's got one. But that's the way. It's a paradigm change. So if you start to look for lessons rather than mistakes, you start to upscale quickly. When you're learning to code, start looking for lessons rather than mistakes. When you are learning to start a business, when you're learning to be a parent, right? When you're learning to do anything that is important to you, start to look for lessons rather than mistakes. I promise you that will be the best way to learn. And if you're just starting school, I know you're 6, so you're just going to be a 9, so you're going to be just at the beginning. Don't berate yourself if you make a mistake. And sometimes teachers might do that, and you have to tell them it's not me a mistake. I've just made a lesson, because making mistakes is the #1 way to learn. But yeah, so I got this painting into this company that I almost said their name. Lucky didn't. Close. I've had one too many scotches at this point. I'm got loose lips. By the way, guys, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. It's been really lovely to hear from you. But yeah, so I decided I would do that. Loose lips sink spaceships. I love that. That is the best I think I've ever heard, ever. I am going to show you something that I've done that I'm really proud of. And I realize this talk is just talking about me, so I apologize. Hopefully you guys have got some benefit out of some of the things I'm saying. And one of the things I would like to add, where I was kind of alluding this to earlier, is that I never thought that being an artist and doing the thing that I was really passionate about was available to me. I just thought it was not something that you could do. I thought that you had to just go down the standard line of and which, if you're happy to do that, absolutely. Oh, thank you, Anna and Joe. I appreciate the message. So where was I? Oh yeah. I never thought it was available to me, but actually, as long as you're really dedicated and want to work at it. So of course, I always say that there's 2 types of moments that you need to look out for. So when you're trying to, because a lot of people I think are in this moment where they're trying to understand what is their purpose in life. I don't know if everyone's worked that out themselves, but it took me 30 years to work it out. In fact, I'd been doing space art for way long. By the way, my purpose in life is to help people see the stars, and it's what I will get up to every day in the morning. Is what I get up for, and I will do it until the day I die. To be a bit dramatic. Lee said, what does the future hold? More of the same or new adventures? Oh, there's something very exciting on the horizon, Lee. I'll tell you about it in 1 second. I'll finish the point that I'm getting at though. I never thought it was possible. And what I realized is that throughout our whole lives, we are told to do things. Now, of course, if you're a child, it's important you listen to your parents because they have very good advice. But there's a point when we become adults when we have to realize that we have to start thinking for ourselves. Obviously, when we were kids, we're taught what to do by our parents. When we then go into school, we're told what to do by teachers. Then when we get a job, we're told what to do by our bosses. And then maybe we get a partner and then we're told what to do by our partners as well. If you know what's good for you. I'm joking. But at some point you have to realize that you as an adult need to parent yourself, and you need to decide what you're passionate about and what you want to really do with your own life. And a lot of people ask me, like, how do you find what you're passionate about? Like, I don't love what I'm doing right now. What would I love doing? And I always say, look at that age gap between like 5 and 12 years old. And honestly, I promise you that something in there is the thing that really you should be focusing on. Not always, of course, but most of the time it gives rise to, because it's a moment of things that you do things because you love doing them, not because you're necessarily forced to, because you don't have the same responsibilities. And you have what I call childhood joy and awe. I think a lot of us lose it. I was talking to Pete earlier about the fact that how good are glow-in-the-dark ceiling stars and how few adults have them is absolutely upsetting, because they're seriously bloody cool. And it's kind of one of those things that, it's like some of those like kind of joyful moments are kind of beaten out of us in a way. And actually that's what makes us so different and special. So what does the future hold? Well, I've got some exciting news for you, Lee. I'm building a chandelier. Hooray! I know this sounds dreadfully boring right now, but let me explain. The chandelier is of the Milky Way galaxy, which is terribly exciting. I'm very excited by this. But it's it's crystal clear resin suspended from thousands of fiber optics and obviously laid out as a Milky Way galaxy using real data from the Gaia space mission. Now, the Gaia space mission is, it's cool. And the best part about it is it's 8 meters in diameter, or 13 feet for you, Mohit, because you're in the US. So huge, gigantic space chandelier we're building. At the moment, we don't have a place for it to be displayed. We've got different options. One of them is a space foundation in Colorado, but I'm leaving it open because my plan is to build it and give it away for free. Chandelier, don't drop the chandelier. I love Only Fools and Horses. That's a good one, Pete. Right, so we're building a space chandelier, and the idea is that we're getting so I'll talk about the Gaia space mission, because the Gaia space mission is amazing. So as you know, when you see the Milky Way in the sky, it's a big long strip. Although I would almost guarantee that not a single one of you can see the Milky Way from where you are. Most of you can't. 99% of people in America, actually, North and South, and in Europe live under light polluted skies. It's 87% globally. So most of you live under light pollution, because here's the thing, and this is a bit of a weird one, you should be able to see the Milky Way. Now, I know that there's 2 or 3 famous power outages in New York City, where I think one in the 1980s, I believe, where people were calling up emergency services saying there's a UFO or something going on. They'd never seen the Milky Way. That was right. It was a solar flare that put out the, now Ollie said he saw it in Zion National Park. I can absolutely, there are things to do before you die. Go to a dark sky site. When you see the full Milky Way, you have never seen so many stars. Where I am in Stoke, the UK, there's about 5 stars. I've counted them. And that's only if you can get a little tiny gap in the cloud, because it's very cloudy here. But it is breathtaking. Tom said best thing, offshore sailing. Oh my gosh, it is incredible. If you're lucky enough to go sailing, you've just never seen so many stars. It's like, and I'm sure you guys in the chat will agree, that when you see the stars in the sky, they're so bright, it almost feels like the light punctures your soul. It is just awe-inspiring. The thing is that humans have been sitting under the stars telling stories about where we come from for a whole evolution. It's literally been the last 150 years where we've lost the night skies. And it's heartbreaking, actually. Alan says they've replaced street lights with direct LED ones. The light pollution is much less now in my garden. I can see far more. That's amazing, but still not away from urban. Yeah. There's a lot of issues with light pollution, and it's there's a lot of work to be done as that, because the truth is, as light, as population grows, light pollution is getting worse. There are areas now in Australia where my friends would shoot, and even over this course of 10 years that they've been shooting astro images, they've seen the encroachment of light pollution into the areas that they shoot. I'll be honest, in Australia it's amazing. It's 2 hours from to a Bortle. So skies are ranged in I'll change the background so it's not less distracting. Night skies, if you don't know, are arranged in Bortles classes from 1 to 9. 9 is like New York City, Stoke, Nottingham probably would be a 7 or an 8. But then you can go out into the middle of the ocean, and then you'll be in Bortle 1. So very, very low light pollution. That light pollution rating was only brought in a few years ago. So it's actually very, very modern, because get this, it's like light pollution hasn't been an issue until recently. And the crazy thing is that we are all used to the idea that you can't see the stars. In fact, most of you probably don't even think about the fact that you can't see them on a day-to-day basis, but that's not normal. So if you live in a place with no light pollution, you can see the Milky Way, and that's how it should be. But when we see it as a side-on strip, because we're at the very edge. We're in this, we're in the Sagittarius arm. Is that correct? No. Hey? All right. And we're in one of the arms, the outer rings of, if this was the Milky Way, we're very, very close to the edge. So interestingly, as the seasons go around, we have what we call Milky Way season, where what you can see is facing towards the Milky Way. And we also have what we call galaxy season, where you're facing away from the Milky Way, in which you can see a lot more galaxies and far off nebulae and that kind of stuff, which is kind of cool. Anyway, the point is that you can only ever see it side on. And the Gaia mission is something that's creating a 3D model of the Milky Way, which is insane. They're doing this thing called parallel mapping. So if you hold your finger out and close one eye, and then you change which eye is open, you can see it parallaxing in the parallaxing. Now it's this effect that they're using to map the 3D positioning, because as it happens, if you can work out the parallaxing of the stars, you can actually plot them in 3D space, which is bloody awesome. So the Gaia space mission is in the Lagrange point between. So it's basically, if you imagine the sun, the earth, there are points in between where it doesn't necessarily orbit around Earth, but it follows Earth around, and it's sort of held together with these two planetary bodies, and it follows around. So what happens is it gets to one side of the sun and it takes a bunch of photos, and then it wings its way around to the other side, and then it takes a bunch more photos, and then it can compare. The interesting thing about the Gaia space mission is that they've got 1,600 papers that are using their data, more than the Hubble Space Telescope. It is actually probably one of the most astounding space missions available at the moment. So I think it's bloody awesome anyway. And anyway, the cool thing is I'm using it to build this chandelier, and the idea is that we're going to give it away for free, because a lot of space organizations, a lot of museums, art galleries and that kind of stuff can't afford to spend $250,000 building a big shiny sparkly chandelier. But that's what my company is doing at the moment. What we're making is we've developed our own glow-in-the-dark printing technology. I went to HP and asked if it was possible for them to do this, and they said it was impossible, which is a terrible word for me. So we went and invented a method of doing it, which is so exciting. So this is the sort of stuff we make. I don't have any available, and I'm not selling them at the moment, so it's not necessarily a sales pitch, but I just wanted you to see glow in the dark space because it's the best. Lee raffle, I like that idea. So what I'm doing at the moment is compiling lots of different images. I wonder if anyone has seen any of the shots of the eclipse that happened a few days ago. Did anyone live stream it? There was an eclipse in South America. It was amazing. This one, I'm going to show you a picture of the one that was the Great American Eclipse. So this is what I'm actually building at the moment. So I do half of my stuff with oil paint. And then I do half of my stuff digitally like this. So the idea is that, yeah, I mean, it's just very painstakingly detailed. And I realized that I have a resting bee face whenever I draw as well. I didn't realize that until I started streaming myself. But yeah, at this point, I decided that I was, I really wanted to take this further. So, I started to do more, do more of these art sales builder. Yeah. One of the most amazing things right now is if you wanted to follow a hobby or a passion or a career, that you can build a social media platform for it. And I know that a lot of people say this, but it really is true. Right now, you have this is the only time in history where you don't have to go through a distributor or some third party. You can literally talk to people directly, just like we're doing today. It's amazing. And you can build you can build an audience, and it's just incredible that not only can you build an audience, because here's a great thing is that, by the way, look how miserable I look. Holy moly.
You just look serious, Kat. That's concentration. That's all.
That's the concentration face. I thought I looked all happy when I painted, but apparently not. I look absolutely miserable.
You have to Photoshop a smile on yourself while you're doing it then.
I tell you what, when I crack the scotch open, I start smiling. There's a point there later in the video.
Fair.
So this particular image took about 15 to 20 days of nonstop work to make. But, it was just worth it because I think it's cool. I will show you the final in a minute. But yeah, I'm basically using Kickstarter and using Shopify and building social media platforms. I've basically gone from having a nervous breakdown, becoming a cleaner, and now I'm really fortunate to run a multi-six-figure art business and have a team of 9 people working behind me, which is just insane. But yeah, I just wanted to open up for questions. If you have any questions. I know I'm a little early finishing the chat, but I was just very excited.
No, that's just more time for questions. I'm sure you're going to have a heap. That was fantastic, Kat. Thank you so much. Your energy and enthusiasm is contagious as well. It's really endearing, and you can see how much you love what it is you're doing. So
thanks, and thanks Lee and Nikki for keeping me company in the chat as well. Thanks, Pete. So what did you do with Shopify, Lisa? So right, and how did you find it? So I ran 2 secret stores. So if you want to create your own artwork or products, I took this Kickstarter model of time-limited sales. And if you're going to do something, I highly recommend it. And incidentally, guys, you don't necessarily have to do a product. It could be a service or, or something like that. But, I'm just really passionate about you doing what you really want to do with your life. And if you've ever had that point of like, what am I doing? And you want to, I really want people to just give it a go. But you don't need to, as I said, what I realized now is that getting up to that first Kickstarter, all I did was 3 hours on a weekend every Saturday for 8 months consistently. And I had enough to launch that first project. So it can be done in the back end. So as far as Shopify, I basically did a similar kind of thing to Kickstarter. I just ran a store which was open for 2 weeks. We took orders and then shipped everything after. The key to launching a really successful Shopify, and this might shock you, but it's to talk about that you're launching a Shopify. And I know that a lot of people have these stories. I can't ask for money. I can't ask for support. I better not. I don't know if anyone's done this, maybe subconsciously, but they've not put themselves out there, because if they fail, they could say, well, I failed because I didn't really post very much. Didn't really put myself forward. Because I can tell you what is terrifying in life is putting your all in and then falling flat on your face, because then you have to admit you're actually rubbish. You know what I mean? But the number one thing is to put yourself out there, to tell people about it. You have, assuming you're listening to this on a smart device, you're listening to it on a phone, you're listening to it on a computer or something, you have the means in order to talk, to share your passion. If you're passionate about, I'm just using you, Mohit, because you're there, but if you're passionate about internet connected sculptures, talk about it, because you know what? People are out there and they love this stuff. I literally grew up and I knew nobody that loved astronomy or space or anything like this. I didn't know anyone was out there, but I tell you what, when I started talking about it passionately online, people will find you. And right now we are having this huge revolution that you can build whole businesses, build massive fan bases just by talking about what you love. I mean, that's bloody awesome. So the key is to make sure that you put yourself out there, show pictures, and look, everybody has to start at the beginning. This is one thing. Like I didn't start off making punching my mic across the room. I didn't start off by making photorealistic stuff like this. I started off by making crappy paintings, because that's where you have to start. If you were Mozart, at some point you didn't know how to play the piano. If you were Ronaldo, at some point you didn't know how to kick football. Don't be scared of beginning and failing. It's actually the most amazing thing ever. And certainly, as I said, and I always preach, it's not about making mistakes. It's all about learning lessons. So I don't know if that answered the Shopify question. I went on a bit of a ramble. Sorry about that. But yeah, just open your Shopify store. I found it really easy. You can connect everything. Obviously, the logistics for me, I did my global logistics through a pandemic. Do not recommend, at least when it kicked off, because all of my shipping broke down. Like no one was shipping. It's pretty much back to them. They've got themselves sorted. But I tell you what, at the beginning, it was a challenge. But yeah, you know, you've got all of these opportunities available to you guys. I implore you to do them, because no one's going to crash through your door and tell you to follow your dreams. You have to make that decision yourself. Absolutely. So if you're going to do it, you know, do it before you die, because then it'll be too late, because you can't do anything at that point.
Ian had a question there. I don't know if you saw that one.
No, carry on. Could you read out the questions? Because I think I've lost.
No, it's fine. You've been doing a cracking job. Well, it's the best guest so far for just reading the questions out. I can just sit back and drink the beer. Ian asked, have you had any interactions with the fine art establishment?
Not particularly. I have and I haven't. Actually, do you know what the random thing is? I realized a guy that I used to go clubbing with runs a massive, is like an art curator / art buyer. And I went through his house, and his house is like MTV Cribs. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, but totally unexpected, because he never talked about it. But I have and I haven't. I'm just doing the unusual path. So apart from hosting my own gallery events, which is basically like you hire your own room and you stick your own art in. I mean, it doesn't have to be a gallery, it could be anything. But the way I am actually painting a piece for the San Diego Natural History Museum. It's not really a fine art establishment, but it's probably closest that I've come to. But I'm just building stuff and making stuff that I love. And to be absolutely truthful, you don't really need a gallery these days. Galleries were back in the day when you couldn't talk to collectors directly, but guess what? Everybody's on the internet. And guess what I have access to? And guess what you have access to? The internet. It's amazing. So all praise for the internet. It brings out the best.
Can we jump on questions?
Oh, yeah.
Or do we have to wait for the chat? Hi, I'm John.
Hi.
My cousin said I should be following you, and it's been great seeing your work on online. So a good question about you. You mentioned that you're like a science communicator is one of the things that you do, and that's some stuff that I work here in Boston and doing as well. And I was just curious about, I guess, what you see as your audience, or I guess, or like an archetype of your audience, and how does that shape the way you communicate the science to them, right? Does that make sense?
I love this question. What a brilliant question. So my audience, I've got a very varied audience, actually. I've got people that are already very deep into space. I would put them all into different cohorts. I've got science. I have a big put. So one of the biggest challenges we have with science communication is that science can often be very hard to get into, because a lot of it, especially if you're reading papers or, you know, any research, you need some sort of level of prerequisite understanding and knowledge to really comprehend. And the problem is that no one likes to think they're stupid. And people are scared to jump in to start learning something because, of course, they don't want to find out that they're secretly stupid. And I mean, we've all had this. It's just part of human nature. We all want to be loved and accepted. So they sort of steer away. They sort of avoid contacting most science communicators or getting involved, even if they're slightly curious, because they don't want to they don't want it to go over their heads, if you know what I mean. So one of the things I like to do is I like to reach out to what I call science curious people, people that are too scared to really follow science, but they like pretty pictures. I'm luring them in. I feel like the child snatcher if you've ever watched Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Anyway, great Dick Van Dyke song. I lure them in with pretty pictures and bosh them over the head with some facts. So I've got this cohort of science curious people, and actually science curious is, it's not really demographic based, but it's question based. So these people are the what does this mean people, or what is this people, the people that are forever asking questions. That's what I would put in my science curious, but they might not necessarily have a very high education level, or have family, or be encouraged. A lot of people that I talk to have never been encouraged to learn. I know it sounds bananas, but there's a lot of people in life that haven't had the sort of upbringing where they're encouraged to be in school, encouraged to improve themselves. They're actually discouraged from it because it's seen as not cool, or and their generation, it's a generational thing as well. So we've got this level of people. Then I've got what I like to call my gorgeous nerds. So people that grew up with sci-fi, people that played Warhammer. Just looking at you guys, 40k, of course. None of that original stuff. I'm joking. People that grew up with the Big Bang Theory, if they're millennials. People that grew up playing Descent, or I don't even know any modern Halo. That's not even modern anymore, is it? God, show my age. But people that grew up with space video games that think it's kind of cool, and they're at this sort of like pop kind of sci-fi type things. So they're looking at those kind of sites. So that's one key demographic that I work with. And then also I have two more demographics. One demographic, and the next one, which is the demographic of people who are scientist based, who just love learning, who are in the science faculties or working in tech, lots of people working in IT. And then the final one, which I absolutely love, is people that grew up with the original space race, that saw it on the TV, that were excited and enthralled by seeing the first man walk on the moon. It was just incredible. So I don't know, I hope, does that answer your question? Those are my demographics that I deal with anyway on a day-to-day basis, and I love them all. And they're all quite, as far as like if it changes my language, not really. Honestly, I just try to be myself. I try to swear a lot less when there are kids around.
Yeah,
I do swear a lot.
No, that really does answer you, and it reflects a lot of the same thing that we're having. Is there's the whole these various of people that we have to try to address, and bringing art in really draws people that are, kind of maybe think, oh, maybe science is something I can think about, because they do like art, and then they learn kind of the intersection. So what you do is kind of great.
Can I tell you a story? I know I'm going off on story time again, but it's about a picture, and it's a really important picture in my brother's life. So my brother is 8 years old. I talk about him all the time because he's my best friend, right? And when he was about 12 or something, he looked at a picture of a magazine. Do you remember when we used to do paper magazines and paper stuff? I know, it seems like so long ago, back in the day, which is weird. He had a magazine, and it probably was a PC magazine, and it probably said something on the front like 386, can we get any faster? Because I actually do remember that as one of the covers. But inside it was a picture of a vase. And I know this sounds very random, but it does have a good point. Under that vase, it said, this vase is made in 3D. And he was like, how is this made in 3D? He couldn't believe it. It looked real, the caustics, or the light coming through and shots spreading along the ground. It looked real. He couldn't understand it. So we decided, I have to understand this. This is too much. This is so beautiful. He kept on going back to that same picture. It was only a little tiny picture in a whole magazine. So anyway, he learned how to use 3D Studio Max. Before it was 3D Studio, it's just called it wasn't called Max, it was just called 3D Studio back in the day. 3D Studio 4, I think he started. Anyway, beyond the point, he started looking at that, but that wasn't enough. He had to then learn how to use a shader. A shader is the material that you apply to a 3D surface to tell the graphics software how to diffract the light and how to make it look like the surface materials effectively. So we learned how to program shaders, but that wasn't enough. He needed to know how the shader program worked. So then he learned how to code. So anyway, 20 years later, he's figured out the damn vase, but he now works doing 3D virtual reality simulators for doctors. He has created, along with the Johns Hopkins University and a few other very key players. Obviously, it's not all him, it's a team of them, but they are creating 3D software that's now used by doctors that allows them to train for things like COVID in all different these situations. Because what happens with doctors is when you go from reading textbooks to being in practice, you have to do some like simulation because they don't want you to kill anyone because people make mistakes. You know, reading a book is not like, you know, you can't read a book on how to drive a car and then just jump in a car and hope it's going to be great. You have to do some practice, right? But when you do practice before, they used to have like a room, they used to get method actors, they used to do the whole, you know, the fake putty and the fake blood stuff and bones sticking out and all that stuff. And they were literally looking for the basics. They were looking, are they washing their hands? Are they asking them whether they're allergic? Are they administering the right amounts, you know, in these high pressure situations? And they would then have someone marking them. And he's created, along with his companies there, he's the chief technical officer, creating this company that is literally saving billions of lives when he's done, is training doctors to be better at what they're doing. That was from seeing a single picture. Because what happens is we've all had those moments where we see something, we go, wow, that's really cool. Almost always it's a picture or it's a documentary or it's some sort of visual or audio or sort of story-based stimuli, something that just it's captured you. What I wanted to do was create that for people. I know I'm not going to be the one that specifically trains people in all of the depth of science, but I want to show people stuff that when they see stuff, they go, oh, wow. Oh, by the way, I finished the moon painting and I'll show you what the final piece looks like. This is the Great North American Eclipse, 2018. I probably got that wrong. Sorry. What year was the eclipse? 2017. I was close.
1 hour.
So there was my story time. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent, but hopefully that helps.
Oh, no. Thank you so much. And that eclipse was actually on my birthday.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
It was super cool. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you so much.
We've got a million questions in the chat. We've got about 5 minutes before people need to go and swap themselves around and get a new drink. But we'll be moving on to Mohit somewhere around 8:05. So we've got 10 minutes from now. Obviously, we can carry on with the questions and people can just drop in and out. It's perfectly fine. Alternatively, of course, I think, Kat, you're going to be hanging around anyway, aren't you?
I'm going to be hanging around anyway. But yeah, I'm more than happy to answer more questions. And I hope
Rob Hutchinson is asking, where do you get the original images from? And are you working from a digital original before you start or working from imagination?
Oh, amazing. So what a great question. I'm always working from, well, not actually, that's a lie. Most of the time when I'm making a scientifically accurate representation, like as an example, this piece is scientifically accurate. Everything is placed perfectly. I place every single star by hand accurately, as is this piece. Well, this doesn't actually have any stars. I'll try and see if I've got any pieces that have stars. But so when I'm doing those, they have to be scientifically accurate and I have to work from images. So sometimes it's NASA images, but more recently, and I don't have a photo of this and I'm upset that I didn't put it in there. I use a telescope myself and I take my own images. And, you know, I don't want to make you jealous, but I drive out into the Californian desert in a big V8 with a boot full of margaritas and we get drunk and shoot space. And it's probably the coolest thing I've ever done in my whole life.
Not fair at all.
But a mix. Yeah.
Sorry. Nikki asked, how do you do the digital light printing?
Right. My was, how do I do, you mean the glow in the dark printing or the digital painting? Ooh.
I'm not sure.
So I have developed a powder printing process, which I can't tell you exactly how it works because, of course, I've not patented it yet. When I went to originally do this and ask HP if they could do it, they said it was possible. So obviously I ended up doing it myself. We use a process of using adhesives and jets and so on in a big mechanized, it's like a box thing that comes down with all the different mechanics in it. But it's very exciting. And yeah, they invited us to go and see their headquarters in Israel. And I told them no, because I'm keeping this one for me. So, for now, anyway. I hope that was the right question. I'm so sorry if it was not the right thing, because I wasn't quite sure of the question. Anything else?
Yeah, not a question. But COGS Management Services. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what your name is. I do recognise you. I think you're part of the art group, aren't you?
I can see you anyway. Hi, guys.
Sorry, I'm Carolyn. Because I came in that way, it came through on my company one rather than me.
Hi, Carolyn. Nice to see you.
Carolyn said that she wrote a poem in 1979 about why they needed to go into space and read it only a few weeks ago, and it seemed as relevant today as it was back then. So that's a lovely thought as well.
It's beautiful. Because, of course, you know, I think obviously we need to look after this planet, but it is inevitable that at some point, and Pete and I were talking about this, there is likely to be future global cataclysms, not necessarily always created by us. It could be, a near Earth orbit object that, impacts us. And certainly we know that in history that they are uncovering now that there have been, this whole, when they're going through and dating ice cores, that they can see that there have been potential cataclysms that have wiped almost everything off the face of the earth, and it could happen again. And whilst I know that some people think, oh God, humans, aren't we awful? But also, aren't we the most amazing, beautiful things that have ever created? And we can make amazing things and do amazing things, so I feel like human life is worth saving. And of course, at some point, we're going to run out of space because we do keep on populating. And of course, the difficulty is, it's like, I always think, obviously the whole Thanos thing, but, you look at countries where they've really restricted birth rates, only allow like a single child, and how terrible that was. It's hard to put a restriction on human life like that. So we're either going to need more space or more resources. Even if we learn to live in absolute perfect harmony on this earth, it's going to happen at some point. So might as well have a plan B, I think, all for insurance plans.
Yeah, probably the guy with the big rocket company might have a plan there. And Mohit specifically asked whether or not your brother got to see big rocket company.
We did, and it was amazing. We got shown around by the CEO's executive assistant in the day. And it was just the most amazing experience. And my brother was like, I was just the most excited he'd ever been. I was going to put a photo up of the particular rocket company, but then I realized it would totally give it away.
We all know.
You all know.
Yep.
He was the happiest I've ever seen him, and it was amazing. Admittedly, to me, I like the idea of putting things into space, and I love rockets, of course. And I think it's just amazing that now we live in a day where, you could be sitting on the toilet and you can be live streaming a rocket launch on your phone. Like, what world we live in? Isn't this amazing? Fabulous. Sorry to bring in toilet humor, isn't it? Right? We just it's just bananas what we can do today. But yeah, I was more excited about seeing his reaction because, I don't know, it was literally the most wholesome moment of my whole life. So yeah.
We've got about 4 minutes before I'm keen to get Mohit on because I know he's got to get off, so that's fine. Anna quite rightly said she's a physicist, and I tell you, she also loves pretty pictures, so that's great, absolutely brilliant. Nottingham is the home of Warhammer, quite rightly said by Alan there. I'm scanning through these as well. Hey, Pete, Kat, thanks for having me. This is from Christopher. Cathrin, you mentioned your secret store is powered by Shopify. Is this the same platform you use for your personal website? He's currently building a store on Shopify. Wondered how he could draw up interest.
I have a personal website that's on something else, WordPress, which, I mean, it's just a placeholder. But Shopify is great, honestly. I highly recommend it. It is, especially if you want to connect it to dropship. There are so many apps that allow you to do that, and so many great companies to work with on that front. So I highly recommend it.
Anna asked, have you commissioned work for scientists, for example, to create representations of phenomena that have not been observed directly?
I have.
Great question.
I am currently working with Sophia Gadnasser on one of her papers about, I don't know if she has publicly announced it at this point, but it's about something, I don't want to specifically say, but it's about something dark matter-ish. So it's kind of exciting. Because, here's the great thing about, art is the fact that you can represent things that don't exist in reality. So that's kind of exciting. Yeah.
Another comment from what was it? Your name again? I'm really sorry, Carolyn.
Carol.
It's on there now. About being able to sit in your bivy bag outside and then draw lines between the dots. It's pretty ancient philosophy, essentially. We've been doing that for years, making our own constellations, and that's a powerful story, essentially, isn't it? So,
It is
Lee, feel free to ask me a question. Oh yeah, Lee, quite rightly, come off mute and ask your question if you want, Lee. You've got 1 minute.
Rather than just typing, I'll just ask it live for a change. Why not? Boxes and lines and dots and lines. Architects have been doing that for millennia, and they still do it now, right?
Right.
Right. So yeah, I mean, fantastic. Well done, Pete, for getting Kat to speak tonight. I really enjoyed it. It was very inspirational and great to hear somebody, with a very different story to the kind of stories that we would usually hear. You mentioned my actual question. You mentioned sort of a few different projects that you're working on. So the Chandelier, a few other bits and pieces and commissions. How do you actually manage like so many different things at the same time? Because my mindset is I need to go focus in on that thing and make that thing finished. Like, do you do one and then finish it, or do you start multiple and then wait until your mind's in the right place? Like, how do you do that?
Depends how big my studio is. So normally I can work up to about 10 paintings at once, because of course with oil paintings you need to wait for 2 weeks for something to dry before you can go on to the next layer, and often they need 20 or 30 layers, so often I'll be restacking them. But as far as like major projects, my background is running massive teams. I used to run a team of 600 video game developers and artists, and getting coders and artists to get on with each other, which of course I always sided with the artist because I was an artist. I'm joking. But I have a team. I have a team that work with me. So I am very, very, very fortunate to be the custodian of 9 people who do all sorts for me. Because actually one of the biggest challenges was doing all of this whilst actually managing social media. So I get about 200 messages a day through my social media channels. So I have to have a whole team that help me, support me in answering those kind of things, and all of that. So the best thing that I can say is that, sorry, I
was going to say, if you had a bigger space, like how far could you go? Like how many people could you kind of bring on board and get involved with? How many commissions could you take?
I only ever take on about 10 commissions at a time. I used to take 20, but as I got more detailed with my artworks, they take longer. So originally my art pieces would take 2 hours, and now they take 6 months to make. So I'm limited in time, but really realistically the next project that we're going to work with once we finish the Chandelier is a virtual reality like sort of space experience, kind of like a walk-through planetarium show. I don't know, you remember laser tag, where you run around and shoot people? Amazing. So they do that now with VR. I don't know if you've seen that. We have backpacks and like VR goggles and headsets, and and stuff. And I always knew that games would come back around, but what we're basically doing is allowing big groups of people to walk around. Imagine being able to walk around on the surface of the moon and see the Earth rise, or walk on Enceladus and see the big ice plumes of the ice volcanoes, or see be on Titan and see the methane clouds and methane lakes and so on. It'd be amazing, but I don't want to just do it rubbish, you know what I mean? I really want to do it super high-end graphics, because that's actually where I come from. I also worked at a film studio doing graphics for films, so we want to do some really high-end, super cool space stuff. Because the great thing about VR is that you just need a room the same size, so you can literally do a tent and pop it up in the middle of a supermarket car park or a shopping mall or whatever, and then you can take people through and they can have their first visceral experience of space. So that's kind of what I'm planning long term. I don't know if that answered the question. I keep on going off on a tangent, sorry, but I'm excited about it. So yeah.
You answered a better question. It's all good.
Thank you so much, Kat. That was absolutely fantastic. And we've had loads of good comments on YouTube as well, by the way. So
awesome.
People are loving it, loving your enthusiasm and your energy. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. And now we'll scoot straight across to Mohit and let him talk about the amazing artistic internet-connected sculptures that he's been making. And I said earlier, I've been following Mohit's artistic sculptures for quite some time, and they're incredible. I don't see many people at all doing what Mohit's doing either. So a fantastic pair of speakers we've got. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pete, and thank you, Kat. Man, that was so inspiring. I'm so glad we paired up, because it feels like somebody has to make these things happen where individuals meet, and it's just like the timing has to be right. So I'm so fortunate that I got to listen to you and listen to your story, and feel so inspired in my own ways. And everybody has their own story, and thank you so much for sharing yours. I have more of a formal presentation. I couldn't do the cool graphics that the Kat has in her background. Let's see if I do a screen share of screen number 2. Are you able to see the whole presentation? Thumbs up. Perfect. All right. So since I have a 2 monitor setup, I want to make sure that you are seeing the right screen and save me from some embarrassment. Awesome. So today we are going to talk about IoT, but in an artistic from an artistic point of view. My first name, Mohit Bhoite. I work as a senior hardware engineer at Particle. So folks who are in the whole space of IoT might have heard of a Particle through the grapevine. We were formerly called as Spark, but the Spark name became so common, Spark Fund, Spark Capital, and whatnot. So we decided to change our name to Particle, particle.io. I have been working at Particle since 2013 as a hardware engineer. So I helped develop our most of our hardware flagship products. But before I begin and jump into the actual topic, I wanted to know how many of you actually know about Particle. I don't have my chat on. For people who don't, Particle is more than just these hardware development kits that talk to the internet. We provide full stack, which means right from my fiance likes to call it little bits. Little bits that talk to the internet, little bits that collect data, and all the stuff, all the way from the little bits to the cloud, allowing us to manage products and fleets remotely. Back in the day, 2013, we had a Kickstarter campaign, just like Kat, that we launched our core platform with. The tiny little device on the left is the Spark Core, which talks to the internet over Wi-Fi, allowing people to make products like washing machines or home entertainment systems or security systems talk to the internet through Wi-Fi. So that was our first successful Kickstarter campaign. We raised around $500,000 back then. And that was basically the genesis. I was hired right after the Kickstarter campaign because they now had a bunch of money to hire real people to do a bunch of stuff. And so I was fortunate to find myself at the right time, at the right place to get hired. And over the years, we have developed several different platforms that allow to build product creators to build products that talk to the internet over Wi-Fi, cellular, Bluetooth. And so there are Gen 3 devices which are compatible with Adafruit's Feather ecosystem. Argon that talks over Wi-Fi, Xenon that talks over Bluetooth, and Boron is our latest cellular. So you can be anywhere where you have a cellular network and talk to the internet. This wasn't quite possible because you would have to jump through lots of hoops to build and deploy a product that talks over cellular. And then we also launched mass scale system on module platform where there are two flavors, LTE Cat 1, that is more of a global SKU. Probably in UK is what people are deploying on. And then North America, we have the LTE Cat M1. But our latest and greatest has been a asset tracking system that allows people to build asset tracking solutions right out of the box. Again, talks over cellular, has a whole bunch of radios in it that allow you to augment your location. So imagine this as a cell phone, but without the screens and unnecessary circuitry. This purely allows you to track where your asset is. Our products have been used in jacuzzi, the luxury bathtub, security systems like iCube, which is like MyCube, which is a safe company. We have been used in stormwater drain management, where you can, preemptively drain the stormwater system so that, in the event of a big storm, you won't have flooding. They have also been used in surfboards, trying to collect oceanographic data and seeing what the health of the ocean is by sticking one of these onto a surfboard. So lots of cool applications. But today I'm not going to talk about Particle or what we do at work, but what I do outside of work, which is related. What I like to do is, my day job is, designing these circuit boards that live inside tiny enclosures. But in my free time, I like to reveal those circuits in more interesting ways. So, trying to bring out the tiny little circuits outside of an enclosure and out into the world and give them a form that is true to what they're, doing. For example, I have, we'll talk through these sculptures as we go along, like, simple thermometers, simple light graphics, simple light painting robots, a spaceship inspired bedside clock. Most of these talk to the internet over Wi-Fi, so that's why I call them, internet connected sculptures. But outside of building sculptures, I just love building things, and when you have access to 3D printers, CAD technology, Amazon, and all these things that allow you to quickly access tools and information, why stop yourself from doing what you do at day work, as in a day job? You could really take it to the new level where you're, making your own toys. As a kid, I always wondered, wouldn't it be nice if I got to build my own toys instead of buying them? It's like a classic story of a nerd who likes to open up things up, but really doesn't know how to put them back together. So you end up with a pile of just broken toys. But, being able to play with color, being able to play with plastic, 3D printing, just like taking advantage of the fact that we live in the 21st century and have access to all of this. So a little bit of backstory. How did I actually get into electronics? So just like Kat was mentioning about her brother seeing a vase in a magazine, my story is very similar to that because I was reading Reader's Digest, like every teenager does in India. That's not true. My sisters had a subscription to Reader's Digest magazine, which was pretty cool at that time. And so there was this article about a man who builds his own robots. And this article was about Mark Tilden. He is a scientist originally from Canada, worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratories. If you have heard about the Huawei humanoid robot toys, I don't know if you have heard, he was the creator of those. But his idea was, why use extremely complicated computers and FPGAs and AI to build simple life forms? Why couldn't we just use simple logic gates, simple electronics that were procured from broken Walkman players or CD players and actually build life forms that show intelligent behavior. So he coined this term called beam robotics, and what beam stands for is biology, electronics, aesthetics, mechanics. And I feel like for me that was my genesis of my career path, because I love all of these things. I love biology, I love electronics, aesthetics, and mechanics. So being able to combine all those two things as a teenager in India was fascinating, because I didn't have access to DigiKey, Mouser, or other online electronic shops. All I had access to was stuff that I was surrounded with. And so being able to build these robots without having to rely on a online shop or PCB board houses made me like really access and develop my skills in electronics even before I went to school formally for that. Beam Robotics takes pride in the fact that these artificial life forms are powered over solar, which means they're chasing light and they're feeding off of light, and that's basically their purpose. Just like, I don't know, humans, we feed, we eat, we poop, we sleep, and that's basically our existence. But in a more condensed form, these artificial life forms again are built out of tiny electronic components, no programming, no fancy software, just simple, pure electronics, and a very approachable to someone who is new to electronics. So basically I would tell my dad to go to his office and basically download an entire website and print it out for me. He was working at the government back in the day and had access to the internet. I think he was the first one to have access to the internet in the entire city because it was a government. And so he would just like bring home just printouts of these robots and circuits, and then at home I would try to replicate it. So over the years, I have built my own bio-inspired insects inspired by beam electronics, and so I've been working. So I was working as a educator, where I was designing robot kits and going around India teaching kids how to build robots. This was before STEM came in. The idea that robots are a perfect way, to get kids excited in science and physics and math and electronics. So I've been building robots since then. I've built robots for artists that would, follow a message on the floor, competitions like Micromouse that you solve a complicated maze, and stuff like that. But this is all like, I feel like it's my previous life. This is back in 2006. Fast forward to 2015. I am here in the United States now. I had just, graduated from a course in a graduate degree in robotics, and I was working as a robotics engineer back in Minneapolis. And I happened to go into Ace Hardware. I don't know what the equivalent for a hardware store would be in the UK, but Ace Hardware is like a cooperative that are distributed all across the United States. And like any nerd, you would find yourself in a hardware store on a weekend, obviously, because that's what you do. And I happened to come across these brass rods, and somehow something clicked. I have been using, tiny electronic components as themselves to make circuits, but something clicked, and I'm like, what if I actually used a brass rod to make the interconnects instead of using, a standard electronics wire? And so I went home and I made my first like IoT based sculpture. This uses a particle photon and a 7-segment display. And the idea was, you could put this on a breadboard or a PCB, and it would be an internet connected display. But what this does is it is more than just a circuit. It has its own shape and function. The fact that you could use a 7-segment display to express emotions also does a good job of conveying information. So instead of a static gadget sitting on your desk that displays numbers, this now, I would like to call it a life form, an artificial life form, actually conveys or tells you the information. So it's you're better able to bond with that piece of hardware because it's structured this way. So ever since then, I have improvised and seen where I can take the brass circuit art form further. So I've done other sculptures that are mostly based on photons that have these I'm going to screw up this pronunciation as always. It's anthropomorphic forms. They look like they have faces, the faces that have expressions. So being able to do more than just connect things to the internet, why couldn't you create these static life forms that fetch information from the internet and tell you what's going on? Now you may wonder why brass. There's aluminum, there's steel, there's copper, and all these metals, but why brass? Well, it's an easy explanation. Brass, just like copper, is easy to solder, but it's stiffer than copper, so it will hold its shape. It's easy to cut and bend. I don't need any specialized tools like like shear cutters. I can solder this easily just because it's an alloy made of tin and copper. It's beautiful. It has that warm feeling of people call it steampunk, or like that old vintage feel, and pairs well with wood. And on the bright side, most of the brass in the world that is in circulation is recycled, so that's good. It's not plastic or some exotic metal that you have to mine out. Where can I get this brass? So here in the States, I usually get this from Ace Hardware, but there are online hobby stores like Micromark, Blick Arts that also sell these brass rods. I tend to go 0.5 to 0.8 millimeter. But if you don't have access to brass rods, you can always use brass wire. There's a cool technique where you can straighten out a brass wire by using a drill. So you hold one end of the brass wire with the plier, the other end inside a drill, and you spin it. And after about a dozen spins, the whole act of spinning a wire actually turns it into a straight rod, which then you can cut down and use in your sculptures. And I actually now just use a whole bunch of brass wires because my appetite for brass has increased over the time, and keep buying brass rods is not sustainable. And then enough about brass. You can still use copper and other metals that are solderable. But what do I need in terms of tools, skills, if you wanted to explore the world of circuit sculpting? Well, the tools and skill sets are extremely simple. Soldering iron, solder flux pliers, diagonal cutters, flush cutters. Most of you probably, since you're part of an IoT meetup, probably have all of these tools at hand. So nothing new. In terms of skills, you don't need to be an expert in soldering. You get better with time. Basic understanding of electronics if you're from a software background, and boatloads of patience. You need a lot of patience. You will fail in the beginning, but as Kat was saying, they are all life lessons on your way to becoming successful at what you do. So have a bunch of patience. In terms of soldering iron, I usually use a Weller. I won this particular kit on a giveaway on Make Magazine website like a few years ago. So I tend to use that. It's temperature controlled, but any soldering iron above 40 or 50 watts would do, because you need enough heat to be able to solder brass. I just use standard no clean water washable solder. I tend to use leaded. Just leaded is much more easier to work with than unleaded. As far as flux goes, this is one of my favorite flux pens. It's a liquid pen that can last you almost a couple of years. I tend to put flux on every single solder joint to make them adhere properly. In terms of tool, my favorite brand is Xuron. It's an American company that makes really precise, cool hand tools mostly for jewelry makers and also for electronics. The one on the right is my favorite tool of all because it has a little retainer clip. So when you clip something, in electronics, when you're cutting component leads, the leads go flying off. But this has a retainer clip that allows, it retains the clip so it doesn't go poke somebody's eye, or you later find it out in your carpet. Working with brass. Working with brass is super easy, just like soldering. Electronics, brass is also very forgiving and easy to solder. I usually use paper templates to create shapes and forms, to know what that sculpture is going to look like. So basically, I'm going to talk about the technique and then dive deep into what are the possibilities of making these electronic internet-connected sculptures and how you could take on your own take and make them. So just some basics here. I usually use a graphite pencil to mark the brass. so that you can rub it off of with hand, and it doesn't leave any odd stains. This is where the retainer clipped shears really shine. You clip them, and then voila, it stays in place. You will notice that as you cut, the two faces are not going to be the same. One is going to be wedged, pinched, and the other is going to be flat. And so depending on what sculpture you're working on, it may or may not be work in your favor. The whole idea of bending brass wire with a flat nose needle plier is like very therapeutic. Every metal has its own personality, its own character. Some are stiff, some are soft. But the reason why I build these sculptures is almost like as a therapy. Like my day job is to build circuit boards and design hardware. But in my off time, I really like to work with my hands. And so being able to bend brass, solder brass, cut brass can be extremely rewarding activity. Then I basically use a paper template to lay it down, and usually use a masking tape to put it in place. And then we go on to soldering. Soldering, just like any other soldering job, is super straightforward. You line those brass wires up, add a little flux, add a little solder, and that's it. Like, it's as simple as that. People often ask, like, how do I get clean solder joints? Well, there's no mystery. If you use enough heat, enough flux, you will always get a good solder joint. But the trick is to rub off the stain, the oxidation, using a really fine wool steel mesh. And once you do that, then the joints really get cleaned up. So now that we have seen how one goes about soldering brass, let's look at what the process looks like when you're actually building one of these sculptures. It's nothing new, it's basic standard product development or a art development process where you're sketching, you're laying out the schematic, you're breadboarding, you're making templates and jigs and soldering. Let's walk quickly through all of these. By the way, if you have any questions in between, please feel free to interject and ask. I tend to give these talks in more formal settings, but I know this is a meetup and we are online. So, I am not watching chat, so I won't be able to see what you're typing. But if you want to unmute yourself at any point, please feel free to do so. So sketching, as with all things, you always start with a sketch. What are the ideas that you have in mind? Just like, you don't have to be a great artist to be sketching. Sketching is basically just, trying to see what the final piece would look like. And most of the time, it doesn't look like what you drew. And so it's okay. So I usually just use just little doodles to guide my way through the ideas. I usually like to categorize sculptures and themes, Star Wars inspired themes, satellite inspired themes, spaceships inspired themes, robot inspired themes. That allows your brain to focus and constrain to that particular theme, and thus you come up with more ideas than just trying to pick an idea out of the void. Schematic layouts, I usually use Eagle, Autodesk Eagle, which is a CAD tool, ECAD tool, for drawing schematics, laying out boards. So very similar process to designing circuit boards. But you don't have to use Autodesk Eagle. You could use KiCad, Fritzing, Altium, or any other tool that you are familiar with. If you are not familiar with any tool, you can always use the good old pen and paper method, where you're just drawing schematics on a piece of paper. This, by the way, was the schematic of my very first sculpture that I showed earlier. Extremely simple: resistors, displays, and a particle photon. But before you just, after a schematic, you would want to test if the schematic works. So you start breadboarding. So the idea is, you lay out the circuit on a breadboard, test it, power it up, and see if it actually works. Because God forbid, if you were to go directly designing the sculptures, put 10 hours only to realize that the schematic was wrong. So this definitely helps. After this, I usually make templates. Templates can be made out of paper, plastic, cardboard, 3D printed. The simplest form is to make paper templates. I use 1:1 scale when designing these templates. This was again done in Autodesk Eagle, formally used to design circuit boards, but here I am designing sculptures with them. So even though you're working on a 3-dimensional object, you can always break it down into layers. And so this way, when you have these 3 layers and you stack them on top of each other, it turns into an actual 3-dimensional sculpture. So even though you look at the sculpture and be like, this is 3-dimensional, but if you look closely, these are just 2-dimensional circuits stacked on each other to give them the appearance of 3 dimensions. So this was like a very simple attempt at making something completely non-functional. Like most of your sometimes hobbies are, you're not trying to make something that is always useful, but this was just simple LED blinking light where you can change the rate at which the LEDs blink. Again, no purpose apart from giving you the joy of building something. Here's another one that I built where I used 3D printing, CAD design to make a snake game. I don't know if you ever have had a Nokia phone that had a tiny little snake game where you chase a little dot. So I tried to see if I could make that, but in a electronic sculpture form. So in this particular one, I had a joystick that I could use to guide the snake, and some bicolored LEDs, the red being the apple, the green being the snake, and as the green dot chases the red, it grows. Again, a very simple game, but a different idea about how you go about constructing it. You also don't have to use PCBs or circuit boards as templates. You could very well, I use Adobe Illustrator to make certain patterns, and then use that pattern to solder together brass. This particular structure then became part of a spaceship, TIE fighter inspired bedside clock. The side panels are mostly for vanity. Most of my sculptures usually have components used for specific reason, but in this case, it's purely vanity. It was inspired by these geometric Islamic art patterns that you see in mosques. There's a whole book written on it, like how these geometric patterns are used, and how one could use it in your daily life. So I use that one just and put a small speaker on it. So every time in the morning when the alarm went off, I would see Darth Vader and a Star Wars theme inspired alarm. This became old in a matter of a couple of days, and this clock does not reside behind besides my bed anymore. But again, the idea is like you're having fun with electronics. You're bringing your nerd out, as they say. Again, being able to focus on certain themes allows you to improvise. So here's another one that I made, which is again a bedside clock, but the inspiration comes from Star Wars, spaceships, Art Deco, like straight lines. So again, using a simple paper template to make those wings. The base came from an IKEA furniture store. They usually have those glass domes that sit on them. So this was a fun project. Again, this one talks to the internet using a particle photon, which it connects over internet through Wi-Fi. The nice thing about all of these internet connected sculptures is you don't have to be a programming wizard. You don't need to install any expensive compiler and software tool chains. All you need is a web browser. As soon as you have a web browser, you go on to Particle's website, write your code in the web browser, and click upload. You don't even have to be anywhere close to the physical device. The physical device could be anywhere else, and you can upload new code, new programs for free, as much as you want. And so I can, design webhooks that talk and fetch to weather.org and gather local forecasts and display it on my bedside. It can basically, since it's connected to the internet, basically you have access to any and all information that your sculpture could fetch and display. So in addition to paper templates, I also like to use other three-dimensional fixtures. Breadboard is the most common fixture that I usually use, just because it's like has the proper grid that most electronic components are designed around, which is 0.1 inch. And so being able to use that to your advantage, helps you come up with sculptures that look like this, where, it has a neck, a face, and the whole base, by the way, the whole chassis is connected to ground. So, I can easily route power to anywhere on the sculpture. I sometimes use, engineer square or machinist square to keep things straight. So using a combination of paper templates, flat surfaces to create something, as simple as a box. But you can take this box and, make it look like, a little robot. So this is a thermometer, of all things you could build, thermometer. So it has a little temperature sensor that looks like an antenna, a face that displays the temperature. Also being internet connected, I can actually log all of the temperature readings in my office or home onto the internet. So super simple to put together. But in addition to just showing temperature, I can reprogram it to show emotions. And so I'm using the same exact 7-segment display, but using it in a different way where it has eyes, and depending upon where you position the eyes, where you position the lines, it can appear that it's frowning. It can appear that it's surprised or sad or excited. And when you mix that with color, you can really bring out the emotion. So I usually used to watch movies like Short Circuit growing up, and Star Wars and other robot movies that usually inspire me to make robots that appear to be lifelike or cute. Here is another example. I called him Chintu. Chintu in Hindi and Marathi, which are my local language, means a tiny kid. And so this little guy, actually I have it on my desk sitting right now. I don't know if you can see my screen, but a tiny little guy that sits on a desk, talks to the internet. You can use that as a Slack notification bot, a thing that collects temperature data, or an email notification, or it will blink and toggle its lights when somebody likes your tweet. So sky's the limit in terms of making these sculptures act in certain ways. But my favorite part about building this sculpture was being able to use different technologies. For example, in addition to just using brass, I also used a small desktop CNC mill and cut milled out a pattern. This was again inspired by the geometric art of our ancient times, and using a thin brass plate, machining it, I was able to create the body. You don't always have to use 7-segment displays. You could use something else as a OLED, an organic LED display that has more resolution in terms of displaying information. Again, this was a like a CO2 meter where it just collects how much CO2 there is in the environment, and volatile organic compounds that include bad breath, if you have consumed alcohol, and it can even detect you if someone farted in its vicinity. So it's also a tooth detector. Don't ask me how I tested that, but I can assure you it works. It uses a simple Adafruit sensor. It's a gas sensor that does the equivalent CO2 and volatile organic compound. It's fairly sensitive. Has a little buzzer that you can use as a notifier, and just when it's not displaying information, it could be sleeping. And so you can really improvise on just using the day-to-day electronic sensors and displays, and reimagine them as characters. So we talked about paper templates. We talked about breadboards. I also love using 3D printers. I have one right here in the back. It's a Prusa i3. Love that printer. Being able to have access to a 3D printer allows you to make more complicated jigs, where if you wanted to make intricate matrices of LEDs, create your own displays, you can very easily do so. And so you may be like, oh, why is this like so properly aligned? Well, the secret is a simple 3D printed template. The idea is that you lay out these LEDs and create sculptures that now have, a grid. And the shape doesn't have to be square. It could be hexagonal, pentagonal. But this is one I made as a way to challenge myself to come up with new fonts. Whenever you think of fonts, you're looking in XY axes. But what if you really twist this? Now you have, axes that are angled. And so that was a fun challenge where I made this little thing, again, talks to the internet using a photon, but instead of using just 7-segment displays or OLEDs, you could display something more interesting. So I wrote this font from scratch, just displaying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were some numbers that were tricky, especially 4 was tricky. Number 1 was tricky because there's no straight line. But again, you can use this technique to build other intricate displays. When it comes to going beyond circuits, brass has been traditionally used by RC modelers, people who make tiny train kits, or architectural models. They use brass, and brass has been the dear of many artists from a long time. So you don't have to just use brass for, say, circuits, but I could actually make like a robot chassis, where in addition to building circuits, I could also build a complete functional robot and its structure by using a slightly thicker gauge brass wire. So this is a project that is my personal favorite. It's a robot that's called Xenyan. And the reason it's Xenyan is because it uses a particle xenon that talks over Bluetooth. And the Nyan cat. I don't know if you have heard about the Nyan cat, which is a tiny little cat that shoots rainbows from its butt. And the song goes nyan 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 nyan. So I made this little light painting robot. So the idea is it has these LEDs as its tail. But the cool thing is I can program the LEDs to blink in certain pattern that when I take a long exposure photograph, it can appear that it's painting in thin air. But in addition to just like painting rainbows, you could paint actual messages or graphics. And so this is one example. The other example is actual graphics. And people do light painting with more organic way, where they have a wand, then they fly it around and take a long exposure photo. But Xenyan likes to talk through this method. So I was pretty proud of this because getting the timing right was extremely difficult, but it helped that I had Bluetooth, so I can trigger the robot to go a certain way, trigger my camera to take the long exposure photograph right at the same time. So here's a short video clip of it in action. And again, being able to use 7-segment displays as its face allows you to show information and emotions. But you don't always have to use the latest and greatest in display technology. You could use something more retro. So these are called Neumetron tubes. These look very similar to Nixie tubes, which was an old precursor to LEDs and other lighting solutions. But this one uses the same technology that is in our light bulbs, the incandescent filament bulb. It has tiny little filaments that glow when you apply current across them. But the nice thing is, these are low voltage, so I can use them at 5 volts and drive them. I don't need any fancy high voltage that Nixie tubes usually require. So extremely safe to play with. And the fact that they are heat driven or filament driven, they're extremely easy on your eyes to look at, especially when you're designing it as a bedside clock that sits on your table. It was a fun project because then I was able to use brass as my interconnects, circuit boards, wood that was milled out of a desktop CNC, and just being able to work with as many tools as you can, because that's one way to justify all the expensive purchases, isn't it? And so I try to use as many technologies, skills, reasons to buy new tools as much as I can. Further resources. So say if you are intrigued or interested in, actually maybe trying your hand at circuit sculptures and taking your own take on it. Hackaday.io ran a competition a couple of years ago and this year that got many entries. And as you can see, it's an art form that is growing in its popularity. because people now have access to electronics more easily, and you can see it's like a whole new different world of how people approach circuit sculptures. One of my favorite artists is Kelly, whose sculpture is that bird. She takes inspiration from nature, and so all of her sculptures are very organic, loose form, free form sculptures that are beautiful. Another of my favorite artists is Yeri, who made this tulip for his wife on Valentine's Day a couple of years ago, and it blew up on Twitter. And he was awarded the best husband of the year award in his country. So that's one way to impress your partner. But his sculptures are also very beautiful to look at, very organic, predominantly based around brass. If you want to start your trying to warm your hands in this art form, you can download one of his templates where you don't need a circuit. All you need is a tiny coin cell and LEDs, and you can make LED pendants, jewelry, or for Christmas you can make Christmas tree decorations. Very simple, very easy to use. And I think that's about it that I have for today's talk.
That was amazing, Mohit. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will open up to questions now.
Hey, Mohit, I have a question for you. When you were learning how to do this, what was the biggest challenge that you came to in your learning path when you started?
There are many things. I think patience was the key for me, because I have been soldering for so long. So it wasn't something new, but trying to reimagine things in a different way was also challenging. For example, as an engineer, you're taught to think in a certain way. You're a problem solver. It's a very different mindset that you need to take on when you enter the world of art, because again, like, engineers are trying to solve problems more efficiently. Why in the world am I bending wires when I can design a circuit board? Like, that is just unfathomable to many engineers. It's just waste of time. And I was fortunate enough to be raised by three mothers. I call them three mothers because my mom and my two elder sisters. So, and they were pretty much elder to me, like 10 and 12 years older. But two of my sisters, one is an economist, another one is an interior designer. And as the youngest brother, you had the mission to, be on good terms with both of them, trying to please both of them. And so be good at math, but also be good at art. And being able to, dabble in between those two worlds really helped to get a better understanding and appreciation of, art and technology. But yes, you have to sometimes unlearn a whole bunch of things when you toggle back and forth. So I would say that's a challenge, but that was a fun challenge.
See, Nikki asks, and apologies for technical ignorance, not at all. Is there any limitation on how large scale this type of work could be?
Not at all. I feel sky is the limit. I personally choose small projects because, just like any other millennial, you want quick gratification. So I'm not willing to spend months like Kat does on her projects, where like you will only see the result in 6 months. No, I want results like yesterday. And so most of my projects, last a couple of weekends, so I can get that gratification. But in terms of scale, the size, I would say sky is the limit. Brass, on the other hand, though, does have its limitations, where how far you can make the signal travel and whatnot. But I don't think there is any physical limitation or how intricate you want these sculptures to be. And also, living in San Francisco, all I have is this little space. And so I try to limit those small, manageable sizes and complexities.
Do you have to enamel the brass to stop it from tarnishing? Or
I might have to start, because back in Minneapolis, I was away from the coast, and so the air wasn't as harsh. So oxidation wasn't occurring as fast, but being in San Francisco here, I am seeing that there's a rapid oxidation. So, but I haven't actually enameled anyone. The patina that the brass and copper usually takes kind of protects itself. And if you're okay with that look, I will sometimes, go around polishing them with a steel wool, if that's an activity you enjoy. I sometimes I put glass domes on top of them to help them protect from dust and other elements. So that works.
It's that enameled wire that I hate working with, but looks beautiful as well. Like there's some luminous pink that I've got in the cupboard here, and that looks awesome.
It does. And the funny thing is, not all brass is the same. So if you go to a jewelry store, there's one jewelry store, or not jewelry store, like an art store called Michael's. They sell brass and copper for jewelry making. But for jewelry making, the metal needs to be coated with some coating so that it doesn't oxidize on your skin. But if you use that for brass sculptures, it just won't work because the coating comes in the way of you soldering it. Sometimes the wire that looks like brass is not actually brass. It's aluminum coated with brass. And so you have to be careful as to where you get your metals from and if they're coated or not coated.
That makes sense. Yeah, that enameled wire. I remember trying to work with that before and having to get either wire wool like you were talking about there, or even just the side cutters and scraping off the end of that to solder it, and you wouldn't get all of it, and it wouldn't solder properly. And yeah, it's not nice. Looks really cool, but geez, horrible to work with.
Yeah, some people, not some people, in fact, a lot of people use those wires in repairing your iPhones. And there is like a whole YouTube channel dedicated to people working on fixing your iPhones or phones under a microscope. And that is just mind-boggling.
I see you've got one in the background there even, but...
That is to inspect my poor work. It's not...
Aaron asks, where do you publish your work, and do you also share the schematics of your work on any websites?
Whenever I can, I do. Most of my work can be found on Twitter and Instagram, where I'm most active, but also sometimes on my own website, which is my lastname.com or firstname.lastname.com. I have not been good at sharing information as much because it's not that I'm trying to protect it, but when I have to decide, do I spend time documenting my work or do I spend my time making more artwork? I tend to choose the latter. Maybe someday I can carve out time to be more active on, sharing what I do.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. Who likes to make documentation? I mean, how much of the stuff that you're doing in your free time and the beautiful sculptures you're making, how much does that feed back into the work that you do for Particle? And likewise, how much does the work for Particle then feed into, I mean, obviously you're using the kit that you're designing in there. So do those two things coexist in your mind when you're working on both sides of that?
And definitely, yes. So things that I bring back to a Particle is a happy me. I'm able to relax when I build these sculptures. So just my whole mental well-being is taken care of. And in terms of, bringing things from Particle into my world, as you said, the things that I design at Particle, I'm easily able to bring it into the sculpture and the art world. So there's a healthy back and forth. This also allows me to, just like flex my artistic muscles. I also do a lot of photography for Particle. So a lot of our web store pictures and photos are, taken in the studio. So just being able to work at a startup where you wear multiple hats and do things, it's a nice little balance where I am like extremely fortunate that I knew what I loved doing as a kid, and being able to work at a company that, lets me fulfill all my needs. I think, it's a privilege to be saying that, hey, my work, I love doing what I do at work and also outside of it. So.
Yeah, I've used Particle Kit quite a lot. I've run workshops with Particle Kit, and they're great for the community as well. They'll send out kits for people like me who run meetups to be able to let people play with the kit and get into how them Particle. I mean, we had a bunch of photon kits sent across. I mean, it wouldn't have been cheap either because I think the import duty was probably more than the kit itself. But that was a fab initiative to be able to demonstrate to people how cool the Particle Kit is and how fast it is to get going with it as well. And is accessibility in that respect something that you see inside Particle, and is that something that you bring in as well?
Absolutely. No, I think again, as I said, I was working at a startup that was a complete shit show. And sometimes, I don't know if you have watched the movie The Shawshank Redemption, where he literally has to swim through the sewers to find his freedom. My story is very similar. I literally had to swim through, a pool of poop to find particle, and in a way where I feel committed enough, because since I was the fourth hire, I can proudly say that I helped build our flagship products, and so there's a certain amount of pride, and also the fact that it's an extremely, extremely open and trusting company. Even before COVID, we had folks working remotely from all over the world. We have offices in Europe, every time zone in the United States except Alaska, 2 offices in China. So we have always been remote friendly, and this just helped us, just create that culture and atmosphere to, help us take on 2020 more easily, where others might have struggled.
Yeah, I bet. I do also want to put you and Kat in a room when she's making that chandelier, because imagine what you could do.
Yeah, if it talks to the internet, imagine that.
Oh my God, how good would that be? It'd be amazing.
Internet connect that chandelier, imagine.
Yeah, internet connected space.
Yeah. Oh.
Space.
I'll just leave that dangling there and leave you pair to sort of. I'll come back when it's done. Yeah. I know you've got to go in a couple of minutes, Mohit, but we've got a couple of questions. Alan's asked, has any of your work made it back into particle in terms of it would be good to have a board specifically to do this for something that you want to create out of brass, I guess, is what Alan's asked.
The way I will answer that is maybe subconsciously I'm designing products at particle that might be better for sculpture building. Who knows? But no, particle now is like more pivoting towards industrial applications and more rugged platforms to scale with. And so with the M.2 form factor and other plug and play modules, it becomes less likely to be usable in the sculpture format. And that's why I tend to go to Gen 2, which is the photon and the electron, just like so much easier to work with for this. I also love using Adafruit products quite a bit. They're Feather and Itsy Bitsy and the Trinket platform, extremely easy to work with. And they're open source, and so that's how I support their initiative, is buying hardware from them and using it in my sculptures.
The ESP range of kit is awesome as well, I find.
Definitely.
And I mean, it kind of feels old hat when you look at what Particle have been doing with that for what feels like longer than they have. But obviously that's all open source. And I mean, some people might shy away from Particle a little bit because they feel they might get vendor locked because there's a platform behind it. That platform itself is awesome because it just skips a lot of the stuff that you have to do. And I know there's good integration with at least with Azure. I've not looked at the AWS stuff. Mm-hmm. Are they thinking about removing that vendor locking problem, or is that just something that's sort of baked into how Particle want to work?
For now, there are multiple approaches you could take. You could take the Android approach, where you have the operating system that is open source and can live on multiple platforms, or you could take the Apple approach, where you own the whole end-to-end experience. And what we have seen, it's much easier to own the whole end-to-end experience, thus creating one ecosystem that you can live with. But at the same time, opening up doors for Azure, AWS, and other integrations that can allow people to work with other ecosystems.
Yeah, it was fantastic when I first got the first Photon and how easy it was then. And obviously the documentation was good as well to be able to hook it up to an IoT hub or some of those services and play with that. It removed that problem. And it also, fast tracked you into not having to deal with updates to devices and things like that, which are technically quite hard usually.
Right. I mean, it's, like when email came along, some people were saying like, oh, I don't want to use Gmail. It's not secure enough. I'm going to build my own email client and server and whatnot. But for most use cases, you don't need to do that. And I think in Particle's case, if you have a platform that just works, then why not use it? Why try to build everything from scratch? And I think that's one thing with tinkerers and hobbyists. We like to build everything why buy something for $10 if I can make it for $100? And so that's the approach we take, because we want to build everything. But sometimes you have to, draw a line.
Is there any announcements you can make about new products from Particle that are coming out, or stuff that you could sneakily tell us? There's no one watching. It's only me and you.
Yeah, I think the biggest announcement of this year was the tracking system, where you can build tracking solutions. And again, this is not just a piece of hardware. It allows you to manage a fleet of trackers online, see them on the map where they are, what their statuses are, build a complete product around them. And so we'll be mostly focusing on making that platform more easy to use and more feature rich the next coming quarters.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's going to work for companies like Amazon and stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely. But one thing I would say, we also have a Particle for Good program, where if you have an idea, a product idea that is doing something good in this world, we have a few examples in education and in environmental causes, where if you have that idea, then Particle will definitely work with you to discounted rates, more tech support to get those ideas out in the world.
If you've got time, Lee's got a question. Feel free to come off mute. I know you wanted to get away, Mohit, so do just cut us off whenever you need to go. It's fine.
All I was going to ask was, is Particle, is it right for mass deployment? So let's say I prototype something and got something working and sign a big contract with someone. Is it the right solution to take to, millions of units?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, so for example, Jacuzzi is a prime example. They have like tens of thousands of bathtubs out in the world that they are able to track and monitor. And they started off with a tiny dev kit to test out their idea. And that's how most developers start off. A tiny little dev kit that makes it approachable. And then when you go into mass production, you jump onto a mass scale, like system on module. So people often think, oh, I just see a dev kit, but the dev kit is just the front face. There's a whole thing, being built behind it. And so console, fleet management, web integrations, modules, physical modules that are better equipped at mass deployment, and all of those fancy things. So definitely, yeah.
So I had a oh, go on. Sorry.
Sorry, Pete. No, it's your show.
No, it's all right. No, you were in the middle of asking a question. It's fine.
All I was going to say was, so obviously, mass deployment, if you want customizations and stuff, if someone spoke to Particle, would they be able to facilitate that? Like, how would that work?
Totally, yeah. So I, within Particle now, I have moved on from engineering to something called as Particle Studios, where people come up with an idea and they don't have the resources to pull that off. And so it's like a small design house within Particle that will help you design an end-to-end complete product. So our products have been in, dental offices, things that I cannot talk about, micromobility like scooters, for example. That's a prime example of internet-connected mass deployments. So even if you don't have the skill sets, either we can do it or we can partner you up with a design house that you can work with.
Sounds good. Thank you, Pete.
No, perfect. I had just before you go, I know you're going to go. I had a question from somebody a while back at one of my meetups who was using Particle about simulators. And obviously, if you've got a Raspberry Pi or you've got an Arduino or anything like that, there are simulators out there, at least depending on what it is you're doing. Is that something that Particle now have or are looking at? Or
we have talked about it internally, but the scope is so big. I mean, we can even start our own company that literally does these simulations and have a product. But the short answer is we are not focusing on that. But there are third-party tools that you can use, since this is Arduino compatible IDE. And so you could potentially use others, and it's all open source at the same time. So you're not restricted to using only our platform.
Fab. Well, thank you so much, Mohit. That was awesome. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to both our speakers, Kat and Mohit. Have been absolutely. We've had so many questions, so many lovely comments in the chat and on YouTube as well. So it really goes to show how good your talks were. And you were both so energetic and enthused about what it was that you were talking about as well. It came across naturally. So thank you so much for that. Hopefully you'll see you both again soon as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. This was a wonderful experience, especially in these trying times, being able to talk about what you love to do and share that passion with others. Today is a work day for me, so I have to go back to work. But I'm envious that you guys are having drinks and going into the night. Maybe I'll join you 10 hours later.
Yeah. We'll hang around. You can bring Chintu and the Zenyan with you as well. And
absolutely. Well, nice seeing everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. As Mohit says, we'll be staying around here for a bit as well until pretty much everybody leaves. So do feel free to come off mute. And I'm going to stop streaming at this point so you can start swearing.